Title: 3 Horrifying True Stories About Moving into a Nightmare Lease in Europe. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. What if the cheapest apartment you ever found became the last place you felt safe? In Europe's oldest cities, history does not stay buried beneath cobblestones and plaster walls. Tonight, you will hear 3 true accounts of people who signed leases they thought were bargains, and moved into something that was already waiting for them. If you value sleep, subscribe now and listen carefully. In the northern quarter of Prague, where Gothic spires cut into low clouds and narrow streets twist like veins, a young graduate named Elias found what he believed was the opportunity of a lifetime. The listing was brief, almost careless. 1-bedroom flat. Historic building. Discounted due to minor renovations. Available immediately. The price was impossibly low for that part of the city. Elias had moved from Belgium to start an internship at a restoration firm. He had little savings and less time. The landlord insisted the discount existed because previous tenants had terminated their leases early. Personal reasons, the listing said. Nothing structural. Nothing legal. The building stood wedged between a bakery and an antique shop, its facade darkened by centuries of soot and rain. Ivy clung to the stone like something unwilling to let go. Above the entrance, barely visible, was a worn carving of a chapel arch sealed with masonry. It suggested that part of the building had once been sacred ground. Inside, the stairwell smelled faintly metallic, as if old coins had been melted into the air. The walls sweated with dampness. The landlord moved quickly during the viewing, speaking in rehearsed reassurances. He avoided lingering in any one room. The apartment itself appeared normal at first glance. High ceilings, tall windows, original wooden beams. But there were peculiarities. The bedroom floor dipped slightly toward the center. The plaster near the closet carried hairline cracks that radiated outward in circular patterns, almost deliberate. Elias signed the lease the same afternoon. The first night passed without incident, though he struggled to sleep. The building carried the natural sounds of an old structure settling. Pipes knocking. Wood adjusting. Wind threading through unseen gaps. On the second night, he noticed something stranger. The bedroom temperature dropped significantly after midnight, despite the radiator functioning properly. His breath faintly misted in the darkness. He assumed insulation problems. Historic buildings were unpredictable. By the 4th night, the cold concentrated in one specific area, the closet. Each time he approached it after midnight, the air grew denser, heavier. His ears felt pressurized, like descending too quickly in an airplane. The wooden door bore new scratches along its bottom edge, thin and parallel, as though something inside had been dragged across it repeatedly. He had not stored anything sharp within. Sleep became fragmented. Elias began waking precisely at 3:17 a.m. every night. No alarm. No external disturbance. Just an abrupt, internal jolt, as if his body had been alerted by something unseen. At first he remained in bed during these awakenings. But curiosity eroded caution. On the 7th night he rose and walked toward the living room. The apartment felt subtly altered. Not rearranged but compressed. The hallway seemed narrower. The ceiling beams appeared lower than during daylight hours. And there was a sound. It did not resemble footsteps or mechanical noise. It was a soft, continuous friction, like fabric being pulled slowly across stone. It came from beneath the floor. Elias knelt, pressing his ear to the wooden boards. The friction paused instantly. When he lifted his head, the sound resumed. He told no one at work. He attributed it to stress, to imagination amplified by fatigue. Yet he began documenting events in a notebook, noting time, temperature changes, and sensations. On the 10th night, the friction evolved. It became rhythmic. 3 slow drags. Pause. 3 slow drags. The pattern repeated for nearly 20 minutes before stopping. The following morning, Elias inspected the basement. The landlord had not mentioned one, but a narrow door at the end of the stairwell led downward. The air grew colder with each step. The stone walls below were far older than the upper structure, rough and uneven, predating the visible architecture above. In the center of the basement floor, directly beneath his bedroom, lay a sealed section of stone outlined by darker mortar. The shape resembled a rectangle. There were no pipes or modern installations within that area. Only old stone. He researched the building's history that evening. Municipal records revealed that a small chapel had stood on that plot during the 17th century, later deconsecrated and partially demolished. During renovations in the 1800s, workers reportedly discovered a burial chamber beneath the nave. The record stopped abruptly, listing only structural reinforcement afterward. No further detail. That night, 317 arrived with unusual violence. Elias woke gasping, though nothing had visibly disturbed him. The air in the bedroom had become almost painfully cold. Frost traced the inside edges of the window glass. The closet door stood open. He was certain he had closed it. Inside, the back wall no longer appeared flat. The plaster bulged outward slightly, as if pressure were being applied from behind. Fine white dust drifted downward from a vertical crack running from ceiling to floor. The friction sound began again. 3 drags. Pause. 3 drags. But this time it was louder, closer, no longer muffled by stone. The bulge in the closet wall shifted subtly, then receded. Elias did not sleep again that night. Over the next week, physical changes manifested within the apartment. The dip in the bedroom floor deepened almost imperceptibly each day. A faint outline began to appear beneath the wooden boards, visible only in certain light. A rectangular shadow darker than surrounding wood. At 3:17 a.m., the temperature drop intensified to painful levels. The friction became accompanied by a low internal vibration that resonated through his rib cage. He began experiencing waking hallucinations during the day. Brief flashes of peripheral movement. The sensation of someone standing too close behind him. A persistent metallic taste coating his tongue. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. One elderly woman mentioned that tenants rarely stayed long in his unit. She did not elaborate. On the 18th night, the floor beneath his bed shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough for the bed frame to creak and tilt slightly toward the center of the room. The rectangular outline beneath the wood darkened further, as if moisture were rising from below. At 3:17, Elias did not wait. He remained seated upright, staring at the closet. The door opened on its own. The crack in the plaster widened. A section of wall collapsed inward, revealing packed earth behind it rather than brick or insulation. From that exposed soil emerged the unmistakable impression of fingers pressing outward. 5 elongated shapes pushing against the thin barrier between burial and living space. The friction sound ceased. In its place came stillness so complete it felt artificial. The floor beneath the bed gave way with a dull, splintering collapse. Elias fell through fractured boards into darkness below. He landed on compacted soil within the basement chamber. The sealed rectangular section of stone above him had split from internal pressure. The earth around him was not empty. It was densely filled with skeletal remains layered in unnatural arrangement, as though bodies had been interred without ceremony. Bones intertwined. Skulls angled upward. Ribcages crushed together. At the center lay a coffin partially decomposed, its lid warped and displaced. Inside there was no intact skeleton. Only deep grooves carved into the interior wood. Grooves that matched the pattern of 3 long drags. Authorities later reported structural collapse due to age and moisture. They described the chamber as a forgotten mass burial site dating to plague years. They dismissed Elias's journal entries as trauma-induced delusion. What they could not explain was the condition of his body when they recovered it. His fingernails were broken to the quick. Packed beneath them was soil from inside the coffin, not the surrounding earth. And on the underside of the fallen floorboards above, investigators found parallel scratch marks, fresh and splintered, leading from the coffin's former position to the exact point where his bed had rested. The landlord terminated the lease agreement the following day. Within 2 months, the apartment was listed again at a reduced price. The advertisement mentioned minor renovations. Nothing structural. Nothing legal. And nowhere in the listing was there any mention of 3:17 a.m. In the industrial outskirts of Rotterdam, where modern glass towers dissolve into abandoned warehouses and canals carry a slow, oily sheen, a Spanish nurse named Marta signed a lease she believed was temporary. She had relocated for a hospital contract and needed immediate accommodation. The listing described the flat as recently renovated, priced below market value due to a previous moisture issue fully resolved. The landlord emphasized the words fully resolved. The building itself had once functioned as a shipping office in the 1930s. Its exterior remained austere and concrete-heavy, windows long and narrow like observation slits. The renovation had converted each floor into minimalist apartments designed to attract young professionals. Marta's unit sat on the top floor beneath a slanted roof. Fresh white paint coated every wall. The floors were newly installed laminate. The air carried a faint chemical scent from recent refurbishment. She noticed one clause in the contract that felt oddly specific. Tenants agreed not to conduct independent environmental testing without written permission. The landlord explained it was to prevent unnecessary panic related to the previous moisture complaint. Marta signed anyway. The first week passed without disturbance. The apartment felt sterile but comfortable. The only persistent detail was a faint discoloration in the corner of the bedroom ceiling, a pale gray shadow that seemed trapped beneath layers of paint. On the 8th night she woke to a smell. It was subtle at first, like damp cardboard. She assumed rain had saturated the roof. The Netherlands was no stranger to moisture. She opened the window briefly and returned to sleep. By the 10th night the smell had intensified into something organic. Not rot exactly, but something humid and breathing. She began coughing in the mornings. A dry irritation that lingered throughout the day. Her throat felt coated with something invisible. The gray shadow on the ceiling had expanded. It now resembled a spreading bruise. Marta photographed it and emailed the landlord. He replied within minutes, dismissing it as old staining beneath paint. Purely cosmetic. He promised to inspect it within the month. That night, she dreamed of water dripping steadily onto her face. When she woke, her pillow was damp with sweat, though the room remained cool. The smell was stronger. She turned on the bedroom light and froze. The gray patch had darkened into a textured bloom. Fine black filaments radiated outward from the center, thin as hair and branching across the ceiling in delicate networks. It looked alive. Marta climbed onto a chair to inspect it more closely. The surface shimmered faintly as though coated in moisture. When she leaned nearer, she heard something faint and internal. A crackling sound. Not from the building. From the mold itself. The next morning, she purchased cleaning solution and protective gloves. She scrubbed the ceiling for nearly an hour. The black growth smeared but did not disappear. Instead, it seemed to sink inward, retreating beneath the paint. Satisfied she had at least reduced it, she went to work. That evening she returned to find the patch restored, larger than before. It had extended downward onto the wall. Her coughing worsened. Headaches bloomed behind her eyes. She felt watched while alone in the apartment, particularly at night. On the 15th day of her lease, she noticed movement. She had been lying in bed scrolling through her phone when she glimpsed something at the edge of her vision. The mold surface pulsed, slowly, inward and outward, like breath. She sat upright. The pulsing continued for several seconds before stilling completely. Marta recorded a video, though under the steady light it appeared static. She began researching toxic mold exposure. Symptoms matched her condition. Yet what disturbed her most was not illness but sensation. She increasingly felt as though the air inside the bedroom carried weight, as if inhalation required permission. By the 3rd week, the growth had crept across half the ceiling. It now formed dense clusters resembling overlapping fingerprints. In certain angles of light, the shapes appeared deliberate, arranged. One evening, exhausted from work, Marta fell asleep earlier than usual. She dreamed she was underwater inside her own room. The ceiling sagged downward, descending toward her face like a living canopy. She woke unable to move. Sleep paralysis had never afflicted her before. Her eyes were open. The room was dark. And above her, the mold mass extended downward in thin strands, stretching toward her body like inverted roots. She felt a cold dampness touch her cheek. Her lungs refused to draw breath. The strands withdrew only when she managed to force a shallow gasp. The paralysis broke instantly. The ceiling appeared normal, though darker than before. She did not sleep again. The following morning, she contacted an independent environmental inspector despite the lease clause. He agreed to visit discreetly. When he arrived, he grew silent upon entering the bedroom. He approached the ceiling slowly, flashlight in hand. The beam revealed not random growth but layered formations. Beneath the surface bloom lay older patterns embedded within the plaster itself, as though the mold had colonized the structure years before renovation. He scraped a sample carefully. The plaster beneath crumbled more easily than expected. There was no insulation above it, only hollow space. He recommended immediate relocation, citing severe contamination risk. He also asked how long she had experienced auditory phenomena. Marta had not mentioned the crackling sound. The inspector left with samples. That evening, the landlord called unexpectedly. His tone had sharpened. He accused her of violating the lease clause and threatened legal action for unauthorized inspection. Marta insisted the growth was hazardous. The landlord paused. Then he asked whether she had begun hearing it yet. The line went silent afterward. That night, the crackling intensified into something unmistakable. Whispering. Not language. Not words. Just layered friction, like thousands of tiny throats moving in unison. The mold now covered the entire ceiling and half the walls. It no longer resembled stain or fungus. It looked like a dense canopy of black veins. As Marta lay awake, fragments began detaching from above. They fell lightly onto her sheets, weightless as ash. When they touched her skin, they dissolved into moisture and vanished. Her chest tightened. Each breath felt partially obstructed. The whispering coalesced into rhythmic waves that aligned disturbingly with her heartbeat. She attempted to leave the bedroom but found the door resistant, as though swollen shut. The handle felt slick beneath her hand. The walls around the doorframe had darkened entirely. In the dim light, the black growth appeared to orient itself toward her movement, responding. Her phone battery died abruptly despite being charged. The room grew colder. Marta covered her mouth with fabric and forced the door open through sheer pressure. The hallway outside the bedroom appeared clean, untouched by growth. But as she stepped forward, she felt something inside her chest shift. A wet internal sensation. She coughed violently. Black phlegm struck the floor. It spread outward unnaturally, branching into thin filaments that retracted toward the bedroom threshold. She staggered backward in horror. The growth was not merely inhabiting the apartment. It was inhabiting her. Panic overcame hesitation. She fled the flat barefoot, descending the stairwell into the street. Rain poured steadily, washing over her face and clothing. Emergency services later attributed her condition to acute fungal exposure. They documented severe respiratory infection. Samples taken from her lungs revealed rare mold species typically found in long-abandoned water-damaged structures. Yet inspectors who revisited the apartment reported something impossible. The bedroom ceiling was pristine. No discoloration. No moisture damage. The landlord claimed Marta had fabricated the issue to break her lease early. He produced photographs dated days before her departure showing flawless white paint. The independent inspector's samples disappeared in transit to the laboratory. Within a month, a new tenant moved in. Marta's health improved gradually, though she continued experiencing persistent coughing fits for years. During one such episode, doctors removed a small hardened mass lodged deep within her bronchial passage. Under microscopic analysis, it displayed branching patterns identical to structural mold growth, as though architecture had been attempting to replicate itself inside her lungs. The building remains occupied, and the lease clause still forbids independent environmental testing. Tenants continue to report minor moisture concerns fully resolved. Cheap rent often hides expensive truths. In cities layered with centuries of history, walls remember what landlords try to forget. If these stories unsettled you, imagine signing a contract without knowing what is already living inside the structure. There is one more account still to tell. Subscribe now and return for the final nightmare waiting behind Europe's locked doors.